When you say you're a hunter main in Destiny, other players start to judge you. It's not your fault though, it's just that some hunters have these massive toxic egos, and well, others just like to use their easy instant win buttons. This stigma against hunters goes back to the very beginning of Destiny in September of 2014. In some ways, things are better now than they were back then, but when there's no content to play, everyone starts pointing their fingers at the hunter mains in our community like clockwork. I dove deep into the dark negativity pools of the internet trying to understand the hate directed towards hunters. I'm talking hundreds of Reddit threads, Bungie forum posts, and Twitter comments. Some of the things I saw left me feeling kinda gross, but I've narrowed down almost 8 years of hunter hate into 17 critical moments. Let's go back in time to September of 2014 when the lives of Destiny players were forever changed. Before we do though, I think we can all agree on at least one thing that's awesome about hunters. That would be those sweet throwing knives. And I might not exactly have any throwing knives of my own, but the sponsor of this video did send me some stuff that's pretty cool. Bespoke Post is a monthly membership club that sends you really awesome boxes of top shelf goods to your door each month. This month, they sent me the claw box that has this awesome karambit style knife from a small company called Buck and Bear Knives. I've always wanted something like this as a cool utility knife, and it's super useful for opening up stuff like packages that I receive almost every day. I already used this thing to cut up one of my old golf clubs to create a makeshift swing trainer. It cut through the old grip like a hot knife through butter. I also got the Slash box, which has an awesome Japanese style utility blade from a company called Bare Bones. It's really great for doing work outside the house like chopping up wood or landscaping. Plus, my community on Twitch always called me a lumberjack, so I might as well have something that can chop up wood. Probably the most fitting box they sent me is called Over Easy. This one has a beautiful cast iron skillet that's perfect for making pancakes. The box actually even came with a great pancake mix, some maple syrup, and a Bloody Mary mix to make a tasty brunch. These products all support small businesses, which I think is really cool. Every month, Bespoke Post sends out great products like these to their members based on a preference quiz they fill out, and the lineup changes constantly, so there's always something cool to try. Each box has a retail value of around $70, but it only costs you $49, and you can preview the box before it ships so you can choose if you want to keep it, swap to a different box, or maybe just skip that month. You only pay for what you want, so there's no pressure to get stuff that you don't really care about. To get 20% off your first box, click the link in the description and then enter code Pattycakes20 at checkout, or go to bespokepost.com/pattycakes20. The date is September 9th, 2014. Many soon-to-be Guardians are about to fire up Destiny for the very first time, a brand new sci-fi shooter from the makers of Halo. After waiting in long lines at GameStop for the midnight release, it's time to put the disc into our consoles for the first time. The opening music hits us and we make our first Guardian. For many players, that first character was a hunter, and like most things in life, many people start to love to hate what's popular. From the very beginning, hunters were hated for nothing more than just being the class that everyone wanted to play because it looked so cool. You would think that that pettiness would go away pretty quickly, right? Well, wrong. Hunters were hated throughout most of Destiny 1. They had the most players representing the class, and they sounded so much louder than everyone else just by sheer volume. Titan and Warlock mains quickly started to notice a pattern, or maybe they just wanted to believe that a pattern existed and never really stopped seeing it. There were a lot of nerfs in early Destiny 1. The community stigma back then was that many of the nerfs happening were a direct result of Bungie catering to the hunter mains. Their complaints were all over the Bungie forums, on Twitter, and over the Destiny subreddits. When Titans had Twilight Garrison that let them in-air dodge twice, the hunters made Bungie nerf it. Sunslinger Warlocks had a firebolt grenade with stupid amounts of tracking. We're talking about hitting people way around corners and walls. It also had the potential for a damage over time effect like Thorn, and it dealt so much damage that a Guardian hit by a firebolt would have almost no health left. Without a doubt, this was overpowered and it did need to be nerfed, but when it happened, thousands of Warlocks around the world blamed the loss of their favorite PvP grenades on those hunter crybabies. The third moment on our list took place in year 1 of Destiny 1 when the second ever raid was released, Crota's End. Back in Destiny 1, we were all pretty bad at raids by today's standards, like really bad. Seriously, most players who actively raided back then were far worse than what people think of for the worst LFG raiders these days, and no raid showcased just how bad we were like Crota's End. The first encounter was pretty tough for many players, so hunter mains figured out an easy way to cheese it rather than doing it legit. You can go invisible to avoid being seen by enemies, or you can just skip major sections of the encounter. In the second encounter, a staggering amount of people never learned what you're actually supposed to do. All anyone knew to do was to use an exploit to get yourself outside of the map, put on the Icebreaker sniper rifle, and avoid any coordinated effort whatsoever. But the final encounter in Crota's End was where hunters were loved and hated at the same time. Only hunters could reliably be the Swordbearer during the final boss fight against the nephew of Savathûn, Crota. You see, the only way to deal damage to Crota was with a special sword. But first, the rest of your team needed to do enough burst damage that he would kneel down. Once Crota would kneel, you could damage him with the sword. But Crota was kind of a crazy boss to fight. If he hit you, you would die instantly. He was massive, so his lunge was equally as large, and connection issues caused him to be a little bit erratic at times. Anyone who got close to him had to be ready to instantly deal damage with the sword, or else they'd get smashed across the floor like a bug on a windshield. This raid was seriously no joke back in 2014. Most of us were underleveled at the time and had very few raid clears, and as someone who ran a lot of Crota's End back in Destiny 1, being the Swordbearer was considered a pretty big responsibility for your group. It was stressful, but also so rewarding when you got the kill. The entire team's success or failure was on your shoulders, and the tiniest little misstep would mean a likely wipe for everyone. I remember spending hours and hours for every single Crota kill that my friends and I earned during those early days. But Hunters made playing the role of the Swordbearer a million times easier with a little bit of cheese that only they could do. Hunters were the only class that could crouch and become invisible. This set them up as the perfect Swordbearers because Crota would never attack them since he couldn't see them. Having a skilled hunter in the group meant you could avoid spending an entire night of trying to finish that final boss, and defeating Crota gave some of the best weapons at the time. There was a legendary rocket launcher that rivaled the Gallarhorn in damage called the Hunger of Crota, the Word of Crota was a great hand cannon, the Black Hammer was a top tier DPS sniper. Really, so many amazing weapons only dropped from Crota, and it wasn't guaranteed that any weapon would even drop. In fact, it was actually kind of rare for weapons to drop, so you really needed a reliable Swordbearer. Some of the Warlocks and Titans at the time became a little jealous that Hunters were always deemed as the Swordbearer, but if we're honest, they probably enjoyed the loot that they got as well. Now we're moving forward in time from the end of 2014 to mid-2015. The House of Wolves expansion was released, and the most popular Crucible mode in Destiny's entire existence was born, Trials of Osiris. Hunters were the most played class, and one subclass in particular was the most popular. Blade Dancer was like an ARC version of the Spectral Blade super that we have now. If you've ever thought to yourself that Spectral Blades was a little bit overpowered, well, the early Blade Dancer was way more powerful. With Blade Dancer, Hunters had access to Blink, the same movement ability that's now only available on the Void Warlock. In this era of Destiny, Blink was even more easy mode than Stompies are today, which is kinda hard to think about if you never played D1. You'd instantly dash forward like the current Blink, but there is basically no delay to pull your weapon out. So you can blink right over someone, turn around, and shotgun them before they could even move their controller to face you. You have to remember, there was no mouse and keyboard back then. Destiny was only on consoles and everyone was using controllers, and controllers couldn't even turn as fast back then as they do now, so players' thumbs just couldn't turn the character around fast enough to counter the blink shotgun playstyle. There was also hardly any cooldown for blink, so you could do it a second time to really break someone's sticks. Think back to when Top Tree Dawnblade in Destiny 2 could Icarus dash twice in a row back to back pretty much anytime they wanted. The blink jump on Blade Dancer was maybe even stronger than this, and that wasn't even the only overpowered thing on the Blade Dancer. There was also the Super, which is probably about as strong as Spectral Blades was at its peak in Destiny 2. It was really hard to outrun a Blade Dancer because they could combine Blink with the swipe from their Super for some insane movement. The only reliable counter back then was a Fist of Havoc or a Nova Bomb, or one of the other one-and-done shutdown supers. Blade Dancer's Super had an option where you could use your heavy attack to send an arc wave along the floor called Razor's Edge. This was a one-shot kill that could travel underneath a Word of Dawn bubble and hit anyone inside. It would take 2 attacks to kill someone in a bubble, but it was just as powerful as it sounds. If this sounds awful, we're still not even close to done. Arc Bolt grenades were just ridiculous in early D1. The Arc Bolts were much better at chaining than they are in D2. It also did so much damage that you could kill an enemy player in Trials just by hitting them with an Arc Bolt and then hitting them with one shot of Thorn. Or you could also just throw an Arc Bolt together with a teammate and wipe an entire team. And of course you could combine this with a lucky Raspberry exotic chest piece, so you'd have an Arc Bolt every single time you spawned. You could literally die in Trials, get revived, and then throw a grenade right away that did over 120 damage to everyone. And we're still not even close to done yet. Blade Dancers had a perk called Fleet-Footed, which is basically like getting the Stompy Slide for free built right into the subclass. Backstab was a perk that would deal bonus damage for getting a melee hit from behind to one-hit kill, but the funky hitboxes and netcode would make this often proc on just a regular melee to the front if you jumped a little bit while delivering the blow. The Encore perk made the super last forever, just like the Gwiz Vest on the Spectral Blades, and Hungering Blade gave your health back for landing a charged melee kill or just kill with your super, just like Devour does now. Perhaps the most powerful part of this entire subclass though was that you always got access to Quick Draw on all of your weapons intrinsically just from the subclass options. This perk was so powerful in Destiny 2 that Bungie took it away from shotguns like the Fellwinters and then also still nerfed it. Imagine having Quick Draw on every single weapon for free. It's no surprise why Hunters were hated early on by every Titan and Warlock. Thousands of players moved over to the Blade Dancer because if you can't beat him, you might as well join him. On the weekends, Trials often looked like a tournament of Blade Dancers just trying to fight to be the top Blade Dancer of them all. Moving on to number 5 on our list, we're now in the second year of Destiny 1. This was the launch of the Taken King expansion at the end of 2015. Nightstalker was one of the brand new classes that launched with the expansion, and boy did it give Blade Dancers a run for their money. The Nightstalker looked similar to the Nightstalker we have today in Destiny 2. They had a smoke grenade in D1 that would slow and disorient enemies as it does now, and it led to one of the most annoying playstyles to face in PvP. If you were trapped in the smoke bomb, you were in trouble, but as long as you didn't take any extra damage, you'd be okay and you could get out of there. But NIGHTSTALKERS figured out a way to make these smoke bombs way more deadly. As soon as that smoke bomb left their hand, the void grenade would be only pixels behind it. Because you were trapped in the smoke for so long, these follow-up grenades would kill you before you could even escape. This smoke bomb plus void grenade duo became known as the Wombo combo, and players definitely still use it today. But just like the Blade Dancers, NIGHTSTALKERS also came with their own movement ability that was considered just as overpowered. Shade Step was very similar to the Gambler's Dodge that every hunter has access to today, but back then it was exclusive only to the NIGHTSTALKER subclass, and at the Taken King launch you could do 2 of them very quickly with almost no cooldown. Just like in early D2, Shade Step was able to break any and all tracking and aim assist. We've already talked about how broken the tracking grenades like the Firebolts and Arc Bolts were, but NIGHTSTALKERS were able to completely negate those just by using their dodge. To make things worse, most NIGHTSTALKERS used the exotic helmet Graviton Forfeit, which at the time gave Shade Step for free. In Destiny 1, we had more control over our subclasses, kind of like the new Void 3.0 model. You were able to select any nodes that you wanted in the skill tree. This meant you could get all the massive benefits from Shade Step, but without much of a cost. When you were running the Graviton helmet, you could also use the NIGHTSTALKER perk called Keen Scout since Shade Step was given to you already. And Keen Scout would mark your enemies through walls with a little red X just like the modern Foe Tracer helmet. NIGHTSTALKERS became very hated for how powerful they were in the Crucible. You couldn't counter the Wombo combo with a Titan Barricade like today or an Icarus Dash like you can in Destiny 2. You just get slowed down and hit by the nade and eventually die. Oh, and by the way, Tether was actually a pretty decent super back then too. Now we're moving into the second era of our list. Destiny 2 launched through the end of Forsaken. In the first year of Destiny 2, Hunters received a lot of hate for the same reasons as Destiny 1. They were again the most popular class, and therefore their voice was the loudest and perceived like they were complaining the most, which meant they were calling for a lot of nerfs to Titans and Warlocks. But things really heated up when the Go Fast update made Arcstriders one of the strongest subclasses in the Crucible, and Hunters were definitely hated for this one. Overnight, the Arcstrider super regeneration was reduced by 25%. Supers were now available much faster than they were before. The movement speed while in your super was also dialed up so you could catch people much easier. Before, the Arcstrider was so slow that they could basically never catch up to someone that was running away from them, but the Go Fast update really helped this slow melee super quite a bit. The Arcstrider's dodge animation was also made faster, and attack animations happened quicker, and the AoE range of the light and heavy attacks was also increased. Basically, the Arcstriders became fast and agile, which made them much harder to kill during the double primary meta. You gotta remember, this was before special ammo existed in Destiny 2, and primary weapons had a slower time to kill, so if you saw an Arcstrider twirling at you, well, you were basically already dead. But to make things worse, there was one exotic that was so broken it single-handedly made Hunters the most hated PvP subclass by miles. Added in Season 3, the WORMHUSK crown initially gave an immediate health and super regeneration every time a Hunter would dodge. Realistically, this meant the Hunter could use their dodge in almost every engagement to break aim assists, break tracking, and instantly start healing when they took damage. Season 3 competitive PvP was completely full of Hunters wearing this helmet who would play the bottom tree Arcstrider build to get that insanely useful dodge back as fast as possible, and with this they could also take advantage of damage resist while they were performing the dodge. This build dominated the competitive meta so hard that Bungie eventually changed how the helmet worked to give it a small health bump instead of instant regeneration, but wow, did it draw some hate when it was first introduced. As the Warmind era came to a close, Bungie made a subtle change in patch 1.2.3 that would mostly go unnoticed by the player base for a while. But as the players slowly started figuring out how to take advantage of this change, the small tweak became perhaps one of the most complained about aspects of Hunters in the history of Destiny. The infamous Hunter Boots Stompies weren't really used all that widely in early Destiny. They buffed your sprint speed and slide distance, but their signature bouncy nature only benefited the high jump option on Hunter. Patch 1.2.3 though improved the other two jumps, most notably the strafe jump, which had become the go-to option for shotgun apes on a Hunter. This change allowed players to bounce their heads on low ceilings to generate a tremendous amount of speed around PvP maps. Burnout, for example, is basically a Stompy Hunter's favorite playground since you can use the movement to rotate around the map super fast. Over time, we really started to see a rise in hatred towards Hunters just because of their movement. This was mostly thanks to Stompies, difficulty tracking the Hunter jump and dodge on console, and the dodge breaking aim assist. In retrospect, it's kind of funny to think back to how the movement exotics have risen in popularity only after a while in both Destiny 1 and Destiny 2. The Bones of Ao provided an extra jump to Hunters in Destiny 1, and over time those became a go-to option for many great players. And in Destiny 2, the Zombies launched without a whole lot of notice, but eventually became so heavily complained about that they finally are getting a nerf in Season 17. It's now September of 2018 and we're heading into the Forsaken era of Destiny 2. And this means we need to talk about the Spectral Blades Nightstalker. Spectral Blades had almost as much damage resistance as the Arc Staff, but it also had its own reason for being hated. When you landed a precision kill while crouched on Spectral Blades, you would immediately go invisible and have wall hacks. This meant you could see where everyone was on the map while also disappearing yourself from the radar. During this meta, the Not Forgotten and Luna's Howl were two of the best options for PvP, and Nightstalkers would pair these two hand cannons with a chaperone for some precision kills. These headshot kills would then also proc your wall hacks, and now you can line up the next kill as someone runs around a corner. The same thing worked great for sniper rifles, and it turned hunters into the best sniping class until the eventual buffs to the top tree Dawnblade. For those that didn't play Destiny back in Forsaken, this might sound crazy overpowered, and that's because it was crazy and overpowered. Pretty much every great hunter player was getting some huge kill streaks by abusing wall hacks. The Nightstalker neutral game was just incredible, but so was the super. Like I mentioned before, Spectral Blades got a ton of damage resistance naturally, but it could get even more damage resist while you were invisible. The super lasted for a very long time, and you could extend the super even more with an exotic chest piece called the Gwizzin Vest. With this vest on, you got a huge return of super energy anytime you used the heavy attack to go invisible again after you got a kill. This made your super last so long that you could run from one edge of the map to the other and kill the same person over and over again. This thing was truly busted, and when it launched, it could be abused to keep your super going for minutes on end as long as you had one kill and kept refreshing the super. Of course, Spectral Blades was not the only overpowered hunter subclass at the beginning of Forsaken. The new Solar Hunter super Blade Barrage was insane in both PvE and PvP. It's been nerfed so many times though you can barely even recognize it from what it looked like back in Forsaken. With the exotic gloves Shards of Galanor, you would get refunded an insane amount of super energy every time you landed some hits, and this was so much energy that you were throwing supers basically all the time in every activity. In the Crucible, you were constantly getting Blade Barrage because hunters would get a majority of their super back every time they casted it just by wearing these gloves. And the tracking on Blade Barrage back then was insane. The only time you didn't get a kill was if you pop your super at some weird angle and the super put you behind cover. This thing practically gave you free kills just for pointing your camera anywhere near the enemy. It basically countered every other super in the game outside of maybe the Ursa Furiosa the Titan, which was equally as busted. As we're moving further down the Forsaken era's timeline, there were two weapon loadouts that were used religiously. Both of them were used by a majority of the player base, but because everyone always saw hunters using them in PvP, they were the ones who really got blamed for these crutches. The first loadout was the Spare Rations hand cannon from the Reckoning and the Mindbender's Ambition shotgun from the Hollow Alert Nightfall. Spare Rations was the best in slot legendary hand cannon at the time. It had a great recoil pattern for both PC and console players, but was favored a little bit more on PC. With some of the amazing perk options, incredible range, and some really high aim assist, it became a go-to meta hand cannon for many PvP players. Likewise, the Mindbender's Ambition was the best in slot energy shotgun at the time. It had awesome perks, it featured the best shotgun archetype, and it had the best one-shot kill range. These two weapons paired together with the infamous Stompy Boots to make hunters wearing all black in the Crucible public enemy number one. This meta loadout dominated PvP for quite a long time, and although both of them are sunset now, it's a combo that probably won't be forgotten by many veteran players. The second weapon loadout that was extremely popular back in Forsaken was the Mountaintop Grenade Launcher paired with the Recluse SMG. This combo was particularly effective on Hunter because with Mountaintop you could jump high up in the air and shoot a mini rocket at the ground to deal some splash damage. It was a lot easier to land these hits with the Mountaintop if you were way above them. If you managed to hit them directly, you'd get an insta-kill, and if you barely even touched them, the Mountaintop would still deal a ton of splash damage. So much damage that you could quickly swap to the Recluse for some simple cleanup kills. Those Mountaintop kills or the cleanups with the Recluse would then proc the Master of Arms perk on Recluse, which would buff your damage. The kill time with the Recluse and this perk together was basically Call of Duty levels of fast. Regardless of what kind of loadout they're using, many players still see hunters as the sweaty tryhards of the community that crutch on whatever the best weapons are currently. Realistically, there's probably just as many sweaty players that play on Titan or Warlock, but the community hate has been mostly directed at the hunter class. With the launch of Shadowkeep, a new system to customize our characters was added. The seasonal artifact was born, and it had some incredibly powerful mods. There was one mod in particular that was so strong it became universally hated by the other classes. Arc Battery gave you an overshield while using your class ability, and it reduced your cooldown on activation. By using class ability cooldown mods, hunters could dodge roughly every 10 seconds. Arc Battery's overshield stacked with a Wormhusk crown, which at this point gave a small health bump and shield bump that we have now. All of this also stacked with the damage resistance that you would get from dodging on the bottom tree Arc Strider. So every 10 seconds or so, hunters basically turned on God mode and became invincible. Imagine if every engagement you had against a hunter, they were using the most powerful neutral game ability in Destiny. There were zero trade-offs and it was very easy for anyone to get the shortest possible dodge cooldown. hunters were definitely hated for crutching with the Wormhusk Crown, Arc Battery, and Bottom Tree Arc Strider, and I can't really blame anyone for using this because it definitely became the most used build of that season. Later on in Shadowkeep, Bungie released a brand new event that would see which class truly was the best. Guardian Games had hunters competing against Titans and Warlocks to see who could earn the most medals. Whichever class collected the most was crowned the victor. Every day you could watch the standings of each class in the competition. Players around the world were ready to root for and compete for their favorite class to win. But when the torch starting the very first Guardian Games was lit, Bungie crushed every hunter main's hopes of victory. You see, Bungie knew that if the competition was 1 hunter medal equals 1 Titan or Warlock medal, hunters would just automatically win because they have the most members. So with the hopes of making the Guardian Games actually competitive, Bungie weighted each class's medals a little bit differently. With this one decision, the win was completely taken out of the hunter sales. They won the competition on the first day, but proceeded to lose every single day afterwards. Many hunters complained that Titans were cheating or that Bungie rigged things to make sure that it was impossible for hunters to win. During an event that was supposed to be fun and create some healthy competition between the classes, well, community bickering instead soured the fun that Bungie had planned. They later came out and explained the reason that Titans had won, which included why hunters had no chance at winning. Bungie said that every Titan that played was contributing more medals than each hunter was. So even on the first day when hunters won, Titans still outperformed them. Hunters really only won because they had the most players show up. A year later, in the summer of 2021, hunters were able to redeem themselves though and win the second Guardian Games. Nothing too serious happened until November of 2022 when Beyond Light launched the 3 most broken subclasses in Destiny 2's history. The Shadebinder Warlock was the most complained about initially for being too powerful. The Behemoth Titan was not viewed as a serious contender at first, but later became known as one of the most powerful subclasses in Destiny PvP. The Revenant Hunter at launch was actually thought to be in a pretty good spot. The super felt somewhat balanced as it really was the first reliable shutdown super for Hunter since the original Blade Barrage. Players were really only dying if they got frozen by Silence first and then cleaned up with Squall. The Shuriken melee was strong, but not considered to be anywhere near as overpowered as the Shadebinder's ranged melee. Overall, players actually seemed to be enjoying the Revenant. Someone even made a Reddit post saying that Revenant was the most balanced stasis subclass. They really had no idea what was coming, did they? Initially, very few players realized how powerful the Shadow Dive ability could be when combined with the Glacier Grenades and Whisper of Fissures. It wasn't until Drewski posted a Revenant guide video showing off how insane the Shadow Dive was that this new playstyle really started to get noticed. Overnight, everyone was leaping around and WWE smashing their stasis crystals. I don't think I need to convince anyone about why hunters were hated during this period. For months and months, pretty much every hunter was a Shadow Dive main until it finally got nerfed. Not only could the Shadow Dive dunk easily kill groups of regular players in PvP, but it could also instantly delete pretty much any super in the game. Trials of Osiris essentially devolved into a battle of who could smash the crystal first. This combo was finally nerfed only for another aspect to come along and buff the total damage by adding an extra crystal that could be smashed. Out of all the periods on this list, I think Shadow Dive era may have been the most painful. Now we're in the final months leading up to the Witch Queen expansion. A massive amount of ability changes have just been announced, both reducing their lethality and also slowing down the cooldowns. With one patch, the Crucible was instantly going to be far less ability spam focused. Or so we thought. The unforeseen consequence of these changes was that everything that buffs a neutral game without directly dealing damage became more potent. So things like Stompies, Dune Marchers, and Transversive Steps are still top exotics, but there is also some new exotics coming up in the meta to take advantage of these changes. With Void 3.0 launching alongside the Witch Queen expansion, Hunter mains found a newly rekindled love for the invisibility playstyle. They now have even more ways to become invisible, which makes exotics like the Graviton Forfeit more desirable. This paired perfectly with some of the more annoying weapons to die to in the Crucible. Of course, fusion rifles are a natural pairing with invisibility. You go invisible, then sneak close to your enemy and start pre-charging your fusion, then peek out as soon as you're ready to let the shots fire, and you effectively have a free kill. Invis also pairs painfully well with bows like Monarch. Aside from the high burst damage output, it also deals an AoE damage from a perfect draw and has infinite ammo. Invisible players are always tough to play against, and with so many hunters abusing this playstyle, it's become yet another reason that many Destiny players hate hunters. But being invisible isn't nearly as annoying as being borderline unkillable. With the launch of the Witch Queen, one of the new hunter exotics was really slept on at first. This didn't last long though, because just a few weeks later, hunters were throwing dustfield grenades around every corner. When you put on the Renewal Grasp exotic gloves, your dustfield grenades have a larger effect radius. Allies inside of your dustfield also take less damage. It's up there with the Stag exotic helmet on a Warlock. If all of that wasn't enough, enemies inside of your dustfield grenade also deal less damage, and this could be paired with extra damage resist from the Whisper of Chains fragment on Stasis. Ability cooldowns in PvP were nerfed, but there were still plenty of ways to build for frequent grenade throws, and many hunters would set up their builds so that their dustfield grenade was almost always available. Luckily, this one's getting a justified nerf as well, just in time to figure out the next reason that the Destiny community hates hunters. But hey, I'm still going to be a hunter main for life. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe if you haven't yet, and let me know in the comments what you think about hunters in Destiny. I'm curious if you love them or you hate them. Up next, I think you'd enjoy my video on 11 things that every hunter main does in Destiny 2. It's linked in the description and also on the top right of your screen.